Okay, everybody, welcome today. Today's the big day. We're talking AI to 2026, trends, ideas for leaders, ideas for teams. What should we be thinking about looking ahead? The usual format for these sessions is Q&A. The hour is yours. We start with some opening remarks and thoughts from Randall, and then from there it's a springboard for further discussion from all of us. I always brainstorm lots of questions in advance to make sure things keep moving, lots of ideas happening. So I'll share a few things about Randall for those who haven't yet been here before. He's founded several successful startups. He's held a long-time position at a Big Four consulting firm. He was a senior executive at an American public company. He's the author of 8 books in the Speaker Hall of Fame. He's a master facilitator. He's helped over 100 organizations scale, and he works with me at the Brain Trust Professional Institute, helping organizations grow through executive coaching, leadership retreats, and facilitating interesting conversations to align teams. So, Randall, where do you want to start today?
Oh my. Well, there's a lot to start. And if we think about, the title of wiring AI and leadership together, I want it to be a little bit more practical. And so I guess one of maybe right off the top, I'll say, leaders don't really need to know all the answers or many answers. Leaders just need to know what questions to ask and surround themselves with people that actually perhaps can actually ask those questions. And I figured somebody's going to say, okay, in the chat, okay, Randall, so what kind of questions should leaders ask? So I'll just run through a bunch of them. The obvious is will this, whatever that proposal was from somebody in your team, make us more competitive? Is there a way to pilot it? What experiments are being done, within the organization or by individuals? What other changes will adopting this particular AI approach precipitate? How do we monitor the progress? What are we missing? If you had double the budget and double the resources, what changes would you make to your proposal or approach? What other risks are there? How do you mitigate against them? Interestingly, all these questions are not questions about AI, but they're questions that any leader probably should be asking their team when somebody suggests, oh, I think we should do this in the area of AI. So there's some very specific AI questions that you'll ask about, particular tool versus the other one. And yes, you could ask those questions just to do your due diligence to make sure that whoever is making a recommendation has actually done their due diligence on the approach. But I think that the types of questions leaders should ask, and the question of wiring it together isn't just simply, oh, what tools should I as a leader be using? Because, every month those tools have been changing, but it's the same questions that you ask whenever there's any kind of organizational change. I remember back in the days of social media, I remember back in the days of almost any technology, for that matter, people have been asking, good leaders have been asking these questions rather than all of a sudden you've got I call it the AI blinders on, and you've got to, ask all AI oriented questions. No, it's the usual business strategy, tactical questions that allow you to make sure that what's on the table, your particular perspective, that leadership perspective, has been taken advantage of. Because people coming up from the bottom, they'll have their perspective, and you've got yours. So that's probably the first comment I'd like to make. The second one is the question of, well, how do we move from incremental to strategic AI? And what do I mean by incremental? Well, I'm going to write something, a memo, and then I'm going to spend all kinds of time shining it up. I want to sound professional. Gee, what if somebody reads it? And you go through all this editing. Gee, am I using the right word? Okay. Then you say, aha, I've got Gemini or Copilot or Claude or OpenAI, ChatGPT. I'm going to use that to rephrase it so that it sounds just that much better. I'll polish it up, okay, and use it. Use a prompt. I'm writing this to my boss, or I'm writing this to the board, or I'm writing this to my team, and I wanted to motivate them to do this and that way. And then it'll take it and it'll make some changes. Or some of the tools have got a button, make more professional, make more friendly, etc. So that is an example of an incremental. Another incremental change is, we're going to do something to serve our clientele just slightly faster. Okay. Or gee, something, when something pops up on the screen, there's some related stuff that pops up next. So this is kind of incremental. right? But it's not fundamentally changing the strategy or the mechanism to achieve the organization's objective, right? If you think about um, something, I'll give you a very specific example from a client. Well, just a couple of years ago, AI was coming about. This is an agency. AI was coming about. This particular agency did a lot of writing for their clients, large institutions, in fact. And on one hand, they're thinking, well, we can use AI to be more efficient with respect to our writing. On the other hand, their clientele was thinking, well, maybe we don't need this agency at all. We could have ChatGPT do all the writing, and therefore we'll bring our costs dramatically down, and it'll be faster, and it'll be more control, and so on. So from a client's perspective in this example, that's a significant change. From the agency's perspective, it's okay, well, if this is going to devour a lot of our business. Effectively, we're being disintermediated by AI. How do we get ahead of this? Right? And so, what kind of strategic changes do we have to make? It's not how do we write faster and more creatively, etc. What kind of changes can we make in our business so that we're adding true value for whatever we're charging our clients? Right? Because if you can be disintermediated, and that's kind of a defensive kind of strategic perspective. But how about the offensive one? The where you go on the offense, not that it's offensive, but when you go on the offense. In that particular case, it's a little bit different. It's going to be what new business areas can we go into? How do we sort of move upstream or downstream, in terms of the supply chain, either upstream or downstream from the business to do a little bit before, a little bit afterwards? Gee, is our business, should it be split into a bunch of different ones, each focused on a certain thing, and each of them using AI in a different kind of way? I think that the use of AI strategically to move beyond just incremental change and workflow and slight productivity enhancements, etc. More data showing up on the dashboard that's pre analyzed to a certain extent by the AI. I think we could do a lot better by looking at the strategic question, either from a defense perspective or an offense perspective. I think that also the leadership imperative here is to start to ask the question, how might we actually, like, if you think about here's our overall mission, vision, values, here's what our strategy is, and we're going to therefore use AI to execute that strategy. Okay, execute that strategy. My question also to boards, to founders, to investors is how might that AI, that new disruptive force, actually change what the strategy is in the first place? And if you're able to look at it from that perspective, all of a sudden you say, okay, well, this isn't just something that the IT department does, or this isn't something that the general counsel, the lawyers do, or the marketing people, or whatever it happens to be. It's a question of saying, is there an opportunity here that we want to explore? And obviously at the board level, that's where that conversation should be coming. At the senior leadership level, this is where that conversation can happen. If you think, for example, in many not-for-profit associations, trade groups, for example, the question of what does membership engagement look like might be very different if you think about where you use and how you use AI. I'll give you a perfect example of perhaps not what to do. For some of the largest organizations, I guess on the corporate side as well, you decide that you're going to use a chatbot to improve customer service or member engagement, etc., to handle things, if you will. So that's fine. You implement that and you save a few bucks because guess what? It's 7 by 24 and you can use the resources in a different way or reduce the number of resources because AI is doing all of that service, etc. But the last time I checked, most people don't have a relationship, a one-to-one relationship with a bot or a machine. A machine doesn't sign a contract. Well, maybe it will in a couple of years. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what's lost there is perhaps that personal connection, which for some organizations, particularly membership organizations, that might be a very important part of either volunteer engagement. It might be a very important part of member retention, right? And same thing on the corporate side. Same thing on the corporate side. So I think it's an interesting sort of question to ponder and everything. So, the question of how you move from incremental versus strategic, I've got some very practical ideas that I think that you could probably take, and certainly if there's in the Q&A sessions, I'm happy to explore them in even greater detail. Um, so let me go through. I've got about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them, and the first is the concept of rangers and scouts. In every organization, from the smallest to the largest, there's a group of people who who are testing stuff out. These are your friends, the geeks who've always figured out the technology before anyone else. These are the people in your organization who say, "Oh, look at this, I could do this," etc. These are the people that very quietly decide to try something to see if it can be made better one way or the other. And too often, many organizations don't recognize who these rangers and scouts are. It's informal, it's not part of a hierarchy. It's usually not part of people's job description. I'm a ranger or a scout. No. So the question is, how do you find out what experiments these people have been doing in the background? And so my idea for you is to say, maybe we can have, and it depends on the size of the organization. If your team size is, for example, uh, 6, 10, 12 people, maybe you have an AI open house where everybody sort of comes together for the day, for the afternoon, where you show exactly what you're doing using AI, and everyone's going to be doing different things. And the sharing that happens there is very, very powerful. By the way, if you're a large organization, it's a question of actually putting it out there. Hey, we're looking for people to be part of our AI open house where you could showcase some of your secret projects, the kinds of stuff that you've done that you think other people might want to think about as well. And you can then have people come to the open house. I haven't put thought into whether this would be virtual or real. I think it's better when it's real. But you could do it either. And everybody likes to get some recognition for some of their innovation. And here's a way of doing it. There's a double benefit, by the way, of having an AI open house. Number one is there's incremental sharing and knowledge transfer amongst people, but probably more importantly, and for the purpose of this part of our conversation, you can get seeds of ideas for strategic initiatives. You don't know when somebody says, "Well, I'm going to do it this is what I'm doing," and you think, "Oh my God, okay. If we just did that in this area, we completely change the rules of the game, right?" So it's a great way for you to see, certainly as leaders, to say, "Okay, great innovation. Yes, we can get some incremental change, but we can also bring stuff up." The second idea is what I call zero-based disruptor planning. So imagine if you were starting your business from scratch as an AI first organization, how would you build it up? How would you organize it? What would it look like? What would the responsibilities be? What would the go-to-market plan be? Right? Not plan B, but what would that plan actually include, right? And if you sort of said, okay, we're going to put a team, we're going to put 1 or 2 people to put that together and see what it would look like. I bet okay, you would actually say, well, here's some things that we can actually do today. And we don't need to wait for some time in the future. Or what you can do is you can say, well, you know what? We're not the only smart Yogi Bears around. There's probably some startups that are using that exact approach. So why don't we take a look to see what they're doing? Right. And if you see what they're doing, interesting, you'll have a certain validation or not that that's an approach. Or you can say, okay, that might give us the confidence to say, do whatever it happens to be. Now, years ago, I did a significant amount of work for one of the global publishing houses. And the big question there was, and no, this isn't exactly AI, but I think the point is relevant. The big question there was, um, there's all these self-publishers and there's all these hybrid publishers, and we do this traditional thing, and we've got our process of here's all the different editors and all the different roles, and here's all the different, and what it came down to was, gee, we've got this massive cost structure. We've got this huge number of processes that have been put in place for good reasons. And that's why we do them. And we got people trained up for them and everything. And gee, how is it that these small startups are able to basically come up with the same product as us? Now, Traditional publishers will say, no, no, it's lesser quality, and to a certain extent, they're right. But how is it? The question is that they're able to do all these things. And the reason why is because they're not encumbered by the thinking that built all these processes and the thinking that built all this technology and that trained up all these people to do it a particular way. So if you sort of say, okay, we're going to put that the secret task force off to the side, and we're going to get them to say, come up with what that AI first organization is of what we're doing, and say, don't worry about resources. Don't worry about anything. Okay. Ask that question. How might we make that happen? What are the bits and pieces that we need to put in place? Right. And when that's done, you could take a look at it and I can guarantee you there's going to be some things that you'll say that we don't need to wait. And in fact, we don't need to tear everything down, but there's some ideas there that we can implement that are actually strategic, right? And it's better for us to sort of implement those than some other organization to sort of come up with that AI first approach. And it's a bit of a challenge, right? It's better you do it than somebody else. Okay, what else? The question of can AI be used to actually replace certain parts of the business or of the not-for-profit, the association? Actually replace it. And before we start with no, 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 okay, we need this because of this, we need this because of that, recognize that, if we start with a bit of a, I don't want to say blank slate, but actually say, where are the solutions that might allow it? I mentioned before all these bots. There's many, many organizations that have replaced their customer service with bots, saving millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars with supposedly better results. Now, as I said earlier, I don't know from a client's perspective whether they're actually happy with that, right? But still, the question of saying, how might we replace it? And if you say that without actually going through, all of a sudden you've got the data points that you can say, okay, does this make good business sense, right? Same thing with R&D. For organizations that are R&D based, certainly in the medical and research communities, AI is fundamentally changing the rules of the game. Fundamentally, in terms of drug discovery, in terms of treatments, in terms of quite about everything. So how might we sort of start to use some of this AI and replace the old way of doing it with something that's so much faster, more effective, et cetera. Right now, that's a pretty obvious one. My understanding is quite a few organizations in that space are already doing that. How about accounting and finance? How about operations or supply chain? I don't know, for example, if everyone's sort of taking a look at some of these, I don't know what the word is, um, basics of the business, if you will, and said, how might we actually replace all this with AI? All of a sudden you say, okay, is there some software that'll do it? Gee, are there templates or are there private GPTs that exist that might be able to do certain parts of it? And the answer is maybe there is, but maybe all of a sudden, you can give everybody call it an AI coach that allows them to make better decisions or to do part of their job. So you can use the person brain power to do things that an AI, at least at this point, really can't do, whether it's in terms of improving relationships or making better judgment calls or spending more time actually thinking forward creatively. Here's another question. Can AI be used to insource functions that have been outsourced? So, for example, the marketing and ad agencies, certain types of support. The question is, who are you paying money to outside because they do a better job? And is it possible that maybe an AI can do a better job, or maybe it can do three-quarters of the job, right? And therefore the relationship that agency example I talked about earlier. Another thing that you can do, and we sort of started with this, leaders don't need to know the answers, but they need to know the questions to ask. I think leaders need to know one other thing. They need to know that there's value in actually being aligned. There's value in actually having that sort of common base of knowledge. We were at a retreat. We're leading a retreat for an organization down south not too long ago. And what was interesting is while we did our thing, over a couple of days. At the very end, what they decided to for all the senior executives, they actually had somebody come in. It was from one of the big platform companies, and actually do this is what this is how you use AI, which was this is what a prompt is, and this is the icon you click on your computer to actually bring up the little chat thing. Like it was really basic in terms of computer training 101 at best. And so yes, it's important that leaders understand personally how to use AI so they could start to feel a little bit more comfortable about it. But I think when we think about executive retreats, leadership retreats, team retreats, etc., the question is how do we harness the brain power within the room to tackle some of the questions that we've been talking about so far today, so that there is alignment, so that the question of that strategic conversation actually takes place. And I think that too often, okay, we're doing our strategic plan. We do that every 3 years. Okay, well, this year we're gonna find our why. Okay, like there's different kinds of things people do in retreats, but we think that the idea of exploring AI and the impact is just as important because when all the different things happen, and like I said earlier in this particular session, so much is changing every single week, every single month. You know, 3 years from now is going to be vastly different than right now, and same thing from 3 years ago. Being able to ask good questions, though, is never going to go out of style, right? Building alignment with the leadership team, not same thinking, but alignment, common vocabulary, okay, is never going to go out of style. Um, One thing that I will also mention, on the question of strategic AI, um, and I don't want to date myself for those who are watching this, call it in the next couple of years. But one of the big things that we're sort of moving towards is something called agentic AI. If you don't know what that means, essentially it's AI systems acting for you as you or as an entity under your direction. So, for example, think of telling an AI, go out to the internet, find products to do such and such, look at all the reviews of the products, and order them based on this criteria for our purchasing. Okay, that's a research task. Okay, and once we have a little bit more trust, then we're going to say, and then negotiate purchase terms and make sure that the right numbers get to the right warehouses or the right locations or that kind of thing. McKinsey, the global consulting company, recently said in an article that they've got tens of thousands of agentic bots, if you will, and they see a future where every single person is going to have one or two or three agents, bots, if you will, at their disposal, almost as a wing person, a wingman, okay, a co-pilot, if you will, helping you do your stuff. Okay, replacing the collegial one-to-one thing with you plus a bot, you plus an agent doing your task and being held responsible for the task. I totally agree that that is going to be part of the future. The question is how do we make sure that that happens? How do we make sure that all these agentic AIs that we create or that we purchase, etc., are aligned strategically with what we want to have our organization do? How do we make sure that there's monitoring so all these agents, the agentic AI, is actually giving good advice or good execution under the direction or autonomously? Excuse me. When we think about brand, that's a huge thing because all of a sudden these bots basically are going to be using our name as an organization. And by the way, our personal name. We saw an interesting thing recently. There's a court case where Air Canada had something on their website about, I don't know, whatever it was. And one of their customers decided to interact with their web bot, which is not an agentic AI, but effectively, for this reason, it can be thought of it that way, and says, what are the rules about this and that, whatever. And the AI bot spewed back the rules, and it was hallucinating, if you want to use that term, and it did not set out what the actual policy was. Air Canada, The person lost some money, okay, on tickets or whatever it was, and it went through the court system. At the very end, one of the highest courts said that Air Canada is actually responsible for the technology that's speaking on its behalf. And I think that's an interesting one because if we, as leaders in an organization, are responsible for the agentic AIs that are speaking on our behalf, we got to make sure we've got ways to monitor and to ensure that we don't fall into disrepute, let's just say, and legal liability, and certainly brand problems as well. I've been talking. I'm embarrassed. I've been talking for 26 minutes, and Ronja, when she started off, she said, "Well, this hour is yours. So yeah, if there are questions, I'm happy to stay past the top of the hour." But Ronja, why don't we open up for questions and see what people have to say? I've got a few other things to say. If people are more in listen mode, but why don't we
Yeah,
open
there's
up the
lots to
channel?
say and lots of directions to go in. When it comes to asking questions, the hour is yours. You're welcome to put your little hand up. You can come on your mic. You can put it in the chat and I can read it out loud if you're comfortable with that. So whatever you'd like. For me, when I was brainstorming questions for the session, you have your, how-to questions, your tacticals, how to coach your team questions. But there really is right now, a lot of information out there. People are feeling overwhelmed. What direction do I go in? You can have that aimlessness feeling with too many options. And I think that how we feel, informs how we think, and how we think informs how we act. So before I wanted to throw out a bunch of, from my perspective, questions on, how to, if we could talk about some of the feelings that people are feeling, the apprehensions people are feeling, might be able to build on like a more solid base, if that makes sense for me. So a question I had was, you said it very well. Leaders do not need to know everything. They don't have their noses and fingers in their marketing and their finance and sales. They have to know what's going on, big picture, their dashboards, they direct people. But the same with AI, they will not need to know everything. And yet, looking everywhere, you have to take this course, you'll be left behind. If you don't read this, you're going to be obsolete. If you don't do this, is this just preying on people's feelings of imposter syndrome and insecurity? Like what is the pep talk we can soundly give ourselves that we are experts in our own field? Like, how do we manage those feelings?
Man, that question came from left field. It's brilliant. Um, and the reason why is what you said. Those feelings, eventually drive action or lack of action. What I would say is this, whenever a leader, I coach a lot of leaders, okay? And so if you've got an organization that's grown from here to here and you're successful, you've done it, you know all those steps, you know what to do. And then all of a sudden, the business grows here and you're a little bit hesitant because you haven't sort of grown a business to that level. And then it becomes a little bit more complex. Okay. And you haven't been exposed to that complexity. So, you want to mitigate risk. You want to continue to grow, but it's weird to say your feelings, but your feelings are a little bit uncertain or imposter or gee, what if I make a mistake? The board's gonna think this, or I'm gonna have to fire all my staff. Like all those kinds of things, get in the way, right? And so what I'd say is this. You have to get to a level of comfort personally. So you can say, this isn't a big mystery. I've got the basics. When somebody uses certain terms, talking about it, I actually know what it is, and not the details. I mean, if you're kind of geeky, you can learn all the details if you like. Use your screen time instead of watching Netflix. You can learn about AI and get great pleasure of it. But most people aren't exactly like that. I think, try it if you haven't tried it yet. Okay, if you're starting to use it, why don't you go to a different platform? If you've always used ChatGPT, go to Claude. If you've always used Claude, try Gemini, etc. Oh, what does Microsoft have with this Copilot thing? And you'll probably notice that almost every piece of software that you've got right now has got an AI bit in it. Sometimes it doesn't say, do, 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 this is AI. Sometimes it's not large language model chat-based AI. Maybe it's a button that magically makes a sentence sound better or whatever it is. But just try some of these things and say, this isn't big, bad, and scary on one hand, and it's called level two. Oh, I think there's some possibilities here. And level three, which is, something maybe I could drive something. Maybe there's some things, interesting things we can do here, right? So give it a try yourself. There's no amount of resources on the internet that can help do that. Um, Deal with the issues of risk because very often people don't want to move forward because of that risk. We have a template on uh, an AI usage policy, acceptable usage policy on a brain trust site. So make sure that that's an appropriate one, so you could feel a little bit more protected, right? But just learn the basics, right? Eventually you'll learn more, okay? But don't succumb to a lot of these scare tactics. These companies have really done whatever, and it's a disaster. Gee, if you don't do this, you're going to be behind the eight ball and everything. So, good question.
Thank you. Bruce, over to you.
Thanks, Ranja. Some good points, Randall. Kind of to underscore, well, the thing we were just talking about is kind of the role of leaders. I used to work with an association CEO in a large association. I think he was a great leader. And he said, kind of in his folksy way, he thought his role in a meeting with the board or the staff was to be the dumbest person in the room, to ask the questions, provide the encouragement, to provide the guidance, but not to know all the answers. And whether it was an issue with staff on lobbying or membership or an issue with the board on what direction to the association, he went in. Now, he was probably the smartest person in the room, but he wanted to portray himself as, I don't know anything about this. Help me explain it, help me understand it. And I think that was great positioning for any leader because I think the reality, especially when we talk about AI and to the extent there is an age divide, most of the senior leaders on staff and board are probably over the age of 50 or 60.
Yeah.
And they may not be the earliest adopters. So if they go with their paradigm, oh, I advanced in my career. I never had AI. Why do we need it? Why does anybody need it?
Yeah.
I think better to say, I'm not the smartest person here. What can I learn from
So,
others?
so Bruce, I know exactly what you're saying, and I agree with most of the sentiment, but let me play devil's advocate for a moment here. My dear mother, who's the nicest person, she's in her mid 80s for the most part, healthy. Okay, but she does not know how to use texting. She could barely use her phone, her mobile phone. And she's not a leader. She's kind of my mom. And the challenge when you take the approach of I don't know anything, please teach me, is that sometimes you're not equipped to ask questions beyond, with a certain degree. So my mother, for example, does not know that the family's got all kinds of chats that are going on. She has no idea. All she knows about is she doesn't know how to use chat and she doesn't want to learn. Right. And so I think that you can say that as a positioning device, perhaps, right? Speak to me like I'm in grade 5, right? On the other hand, when you in fact know nothing and you hide behind that as a leader, I think you're missing an opportunity to really extend the conversation in a direction that it needs to go, rather than just be a recipient. So I hope that puts a nuance on your comment
Mhm.
that's helpful.
Yeah, it does. And another point you made, and I may not be paraphrasing you perfectly, but kind of how would a startup do what you do? And I think in my world of membership and trade associations, where the competition is fierce, it kind of reminded me, and this goes back many decades ago, somebody pointed out that General Electric did not invent any of the appliances that they sell because they were all invented by small entrepreneurs in their garages or basements because they didn't have any of those constraints that you talked about in big organizations. And then General Electric would come in and buy the patent and sell it because they had the marketing engine and the manufacturing capacity. And I think that associations run the same risk that organizations, small organizations that all you need is an internet account and a ChatGPT account can basically go out there and create these types of information services, networking services that members need. And they can do that in the next 30 days without any of the encumbrances like boards and staff, directors, and all that. And I think that's why you see in many spaces, in many trades and professions, these information sources, or some of them
So
are even calling themselves for-profit associations, because they are doing that and they're competing with the 30, 40, $50 million association that can't get out of its own way.
what I'll do, Bruce, and for anyone listening, is if you go to the Brain Trust Brain Trust Professional Institute website, and you can actually look on there. We've got like dozens and dozens of recordings and conversations like this one on association management and issues and changes. And there's an awful lot more in there. So I don't want to use up all the time just on the association comment, although I take it you're right. I'm going to take the conversation a little bit different way. What happens when you've got leaders or middle managers who are not, quote, or are terribly resistant to adopting AI, right? If you've got a CEO or an executive director, managing partner who's like an ostrich with their head in the ground. As a board, I know what I would do. Okay, and I do sit on boards. Question whether that person right now is the best person given the dramatic societal change. I can't imagine any CEO or managing partner or executive director that truly has got their heads in the sand, right? But the question is, how do you sort of move forward? And sometimes you don't have the internal resources to actually do this. In your case, Bruce, you talk about the for-profit associations. Gee, the Brain Trust Professional Institute, we've got over 1,100 resources that are available. Some free, some we charge for. And that's not to knock the professional associations, right? But the world's changing, right? And every organization should be thinking about how do we get ahead of this change rather than saying, gee, we found the mother lode of gold. We're just going to dive into that because as soon as you do that, you miss the opportunities, certainly for things like AI, but others can start to build those relationships with your key stakeholders as well.
I
Ronja,
want,
another question
yeah, I have a
from the group?
question. You guys are
Thanks,
all
Bruce.
welcome to participate. Please put it in the chat. Please join. I just keep things moving, new ideas going. I want to talk about, again, those maybe not feelings, but these things that maybe we're holding on to, we have to let go to let space for, productive thinking, productive action. Everyone is talking about AI errors, the hallucinations. Why are we so worried about the AI tools making errors when make way more errors? Every study shows that humans make way more errors. So is this just some sort of psychological trick we're doing to self-soothe ourselves that the robots won't replace us? Because I mean, the data doesn't support this kind of thinking.
Huh. I don't, Ronja, I guess I would sort of respond by saying, we've got our entire life where we've got this spidey sense, okay, of I could see an error. For me, I'm reading a book and I could see a typographical error, like it's right in front of me. It's bizarre. Okay, I'm used to seeing that error. Okay, if somebody on the team makes a mistake, I could probably see where that mistake might be made. Okay, I've got an entire career, lifetime of knowing how that is. But Rania, when was the last time you or I thought about the lifetime that we've spent getting used to the AI type mistakes? I remember the first time I saw somebody with six fingers, and it was funny, and there's all kinds of memes on that kind of stuff, or two different ears, okay, or whatever else it happened to be. And these are a novel to us, a novel type of mistake that we weren't used to before. Yet, all the marketers, and in fact, the fact of it is that AI can do some amazing, amazing things. So we think, it's infallible. And then, there's, version 3 or 3.5 or 4 or 4.1 and 4.5, and each one gets better and better and better. So on one hand, we've got these rose-tinted glasses thinking that it's perfect, right? We have very little experience, actually understanding where those types of hallucinations might come in. So it becomes a little bit, maybe for some people it's self-soothing, if you will, but I think that as we start to rely on these things, as either proxies for the decisions we make, or, here's a perfect example of not a hallucination, but a risk and error. Let's just say you ask AI to put together a list of six things to help you achieve whatever, okay, or for a client or for a member, whatever it happens to be, okay. And it comes out with six, and you look at that and you say, hey, these are really good. Okay. Oh, I didn't think about number five. That was new to me. And it comes up with a paragraph under each that describes it in detail. You're thinking, oh, I could take that, make a few editorial changes, and then I'm going to use that. But going through that process, you say, no, I don't see six fingers in the illustration. But the question is, what was actually missed? Maybe the best answer is these eight, and you only saw six. And who's to say those are the best six? You know, ChatGPT or Claude does not know the entire history of your organization, doesn't know the people, doesn't know the clientele, doesn't know your forward strategy. No matter how much you sort of prompt it, etc., it doesn't have the full picture that you actually have. So that's a bit of a challenge. And so I think it's some of these risks are not outright hallucinations, but I think they're ones that we, being human, we sort of don't see because we're almost, you know, magicalized by the answers that we do get. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's brilliant. Oh, I'm going to use it. What's missing? What's missing? So,
I'll take us here to a question from Lindsay. Given that association management firms handle data for many separate client organizations, how should AI tools be used without violating confidentiality or client data ownership when using platforms like ChatGPT or Copilot?
okay, now we're getting into weeds. Okay. Lindsay,
We should
what
have
can I
had a
say?
session for the weeds and a session for the concepts, you know?
Yeah, so wiring and leadership together, that's a really good question. So one of the things you can do is you can, for example, you can take some of the platforms, many platforms have what's called memory, and it remembers everything that you've ever put in there. And therefore, if you're part of one organization, it's very simple. It learns more and more and more and more and more about you, right? So you can turn memory off. Okay. The other thing that you can do is you can say, you know what, I'm going to make a project if it's Claude or a private GPT if it's that, and you can sort of load stuff in for each of your separate things, and you can make sure that when you're actually doing some on one, you're doing some on the other. Copilot's a little bit different because it's embedded within the Microsoft world, if you will. Gemini, for that reason, that's kind of embedded within and enhances the Google world. So it's harder to do it for some of those, but with Claude and with ChatGPT, what I would do is I would say, we're going to have a separate instance for each one of these. Okay, so we're going to have three ChatGPT. If we have three separate clients, they're going to have three ChatGPTs, and we're going to have each of them learning all the details over time. And so you log out of one, you log into the other, or decide you're going to do one on Claude and the other one on ChatGPT, right? So that's one way, particularly if it's super sensitive information. I think it's very, very difficult when a lot of the tools, which are really in their infancy, are not designed for that kind of thing. But there's enough folks in that world, accounting firms, law firms, consulting firms, and yes, association management companies, and where you're serving multiple people, and you need to, perhaps even from a regulatory perspective, keep them completely independent, right? So you could do it in a fashion, okay, but you got to decide how separate they need to be. If you're just using it to do some non-strategic stuff, maybe it doesn't matter. Okay. On the other hand, to be able to say to your clients, if you're in any kind of professional services, what we do for you is fill in the blank. I'll also say, if you think about where is the data domiciled, there's a bit of a sovereign data risk issue that's happening here as well, because it could very well be that if you're dealing with the government, you may need to make sure that the data is based in the country of, in a particular country and not in a different particular country. You may find, by the way, that just on that some of the new U.S. Laws say that it's not just where it's sitting, but if an American company controls, okay, then they can sort of use the courts to get access to your data. So, gee, maybe we should actually have a provider that's based in our country. Like there's a whole bunch of issues sort of in there. So, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you very much.
I'll ask another question, sharing Randall with all of you. You guys get priority, of course. Going back to my theme here of this, human ability versus machine AI ability, Daniel Goleman wrote his groundbreaking book, Emotional Intelligence, back in 1995. And I happen to have had the 25-year anniversary updated edition in my hands very recently. And in the introduction, this takes us to recent years, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that EI will be all the more valuable, emotional intelligence, when AI becomes mainstream working alongside us in the workplace, because he foresees that nuanced emotional intelligence, human skill of their social interaction, of the consciousness of reading a room, all that stuff will not be easy or in the near future possible for AI to mimic. Do you think this is true? Everything I'm
No,
reading says I agree with you. I think AI is calibrating much faster than any of us thought. And you just look at the number of people that have AI girlfriends, you know. It's like what do you what human skills do you think are going to be needed?
it's a really tough one. They're all talking about getting to that singularity point, getting the point where there's artificial general intelligence, where these AIs you know, have full human capability in a certain sense with respect to everything. But they sort of, that's like the airplane flying at 30,000 feet, to your point, Rania. It's not talking about that human to human interaction. Okay. And yes, I guess if you've got a bot that's really that good and that's your girlfriend or boyfriend or something like that, I suspect, Rania, both of our spouses would have something to say about that. But it speaks to a lot of complication, right? It speaks to an awful lot of complication. What if, for example, a bot at the workspace decides to coach somebody to quit their job or to, do something else that's not in the company's interest, okay? With respect to where are humans in the future? Okay, so now this will be embarrassing because when somebody watches this video in a couple of years, maybe 5 years, 3 years, and people think, "Oh God, is this guy wrong?" Um, let me say this. So far, so far, humans are able to emote in so many nuanced, different ways. I don't know how long it'll take before a computer can do that authentically. I think that we're growing people. We learn in ways that are influenced, and we're able to, at least at this point, over machines, wire things together that maybe they're not able to, because fundamentally that machine mind versus our organic mind is actually different. So the whole question of creativity, will a bot be able to paint like Picasso or Rembrandt or Monet? Right? Well, the newest artists or dance performances, etc., look as beautiful if they're robots doing it as opposed to people, right? Is the experience that you actually have after watching a musician and you actually have a chance to speak to them, the thrill of actually being there, will it feel the same? So I think all these dimensions, we'll have to see what it comes from. But if we were to sort of rewind back to really the next year, two, three, as we start to embed agentic systems, and gee, as soon as we put that system into a robot, okay, boy, all of a sudden they're going to have two legs and two arms. Um, we have to be very cognizant of what the knock-on effects might actually be in terms of the relationships that we have, our roles as managers, right? People are people, right? And I'm not so sure if these agentic systems and these AIs have feelings or could have feelings the same way we do, right? So I think that, we feel, we create, we wire things together in ways that, at least so far, um, um, AI is not able to, or at least it'll be doing it in a different way. And if I could give one last prediction on that question, it's this. We all know the power of diversity. If you've got a number of people in the room that come from different backgrounds or different ages, different genders, like all those diversity things, grown up in different cultures even, um, and you say, let's brainstorm and come up with stuff. We know that diversity will actually bring in a lot of ideas from a lot of different places. And I think that if, for example, we each are paired up with that AI, agentic AI bot that's our partner in whatever our job is, I suspect that that's also another handle on diversity. There's that machine learning kind of diversity perspective, I should say, and then there's that human type of perspective. And really, I think it's we as the humans, if you will be able to sort of say, okay, those are different things. This is what it might mean. This is what we might want to do. So very cool question. Very
Thank
cool question.
Thank you, Randall.
We
We have a comment and a question in the chat here from Robin. In digital pathology, test validation has taken images of dogs and interpreted them as elephants. Humans in the loop is necessary to be sure, but AI as assistive technology is here in many medical disciplines, radiology, etc. Yes, thank you, Robin. That's a very good example. And then Khadija, forgive me saying your name incorrectly. What are some best practices for AI note-taking, recording, permission, sharing parameters, filing and such?
That's a very good one. And it's kind of part of it is kind of what's the social contract that you have in your interactions with whoever those people might happen to be. So, for example, in one organization, it may very well be that the Zoom or the Teams AI note taker is on so that everybody could ask questions of the meeting to see what was said, etc. Recording's okay. I had a situation a number of years ago, not that many years ago, where a client of mine said, I met with somebody who wanted to talk to me about something or other. And I noticed inside their shirt sleeve, there's a little microphone, and we're sitting having coffee, real life, having coffee, and I asked, "What's that?" And the guy said, "Oh, I'm recording our meeting today." And there was a big shock, and it was certainly unexpected. And so he got up and said, I think our conversation's at an end and left. His question to me is, was that an appropriate behavior? And I said, yes. Okay, because he didn't say beforehand what's going on, right? So I think that these are the kinds of things where, there's a social contract involved. That's one thing. In terms of, okay, so you sort of dealt with that. Which one should you use? They're all actually changing pretty quickly. They're actually, Ronnie and I we use one, okay, one particular one. Others use others, and they're all sort of duking it out. Zoom has got their own one. I think that you just choose one, okay, and you see how it works, and you see what the upgrades are. There's a roadmap, and then somebody says, "Oh, if you tried this, you tried it, it's that much better." So you try that much better. The question, though, that I would ask, and this is the real risk, is what happens and who owns the transcripts? Are those transcripts of all these AI note taking, are they being used to train a model to be better? Are they being used to possibly monetize that data being monetized in some way, unbeknownst to you, completely unbeknownst to you? Is it possible that during these meetings, that the AI note taker is taking these meetings and using that data? Is it possible that you're talking about trade secrets or company confidential information or personal information you're talking with you and say a family member about very personal things? Right? Is it right that they actually have? So what I would suggest to you is take a look at the terms of service of whatever the AI note taker actually is and say, do I actually own this? You would be shocked at how many of these ones where you do not own. And they retain all rights, not just for training purposes, but for whatever the heck they like, right? And so I hope, Khadija, that helps answer at least part of your question.
I'll ask a question. I want to talk about people talk about, overusing AI or relying on AI reliance and how it's going to erode our critical thinking skills. Okay, I wanted to address this myth or fact. So from my perspective, our brains are pretty good at identifying, risks and significant issues, significant decisions. And what erodes our critical thinking is, being in an echo chamber, being on autopilot, isolating ourselves from innovative new ideas. Like what's your take on this AI rotting our brains?
I don't know.
Is that the plan?
Uh, that's the big, big ugly plan. You know, Gee, I don't know. I had I had a friend back in the early days of PCs who was building his PCs, and when decent computers came out already formed, okay, he thought this is terrible. You do not know how it operates. I'm sure it happened in the early days of the automobile as well. If you don't know how to fix your car, you're not a driver, right? And I think that the same is true really with AI today, right? It really is a different kind of thing. Like it really is a different kind of thing. And you don't need to know everything underneath in order to kind of make it happen. Yet, on the other hand, I also think there's an opportunity here for loss. Like any muscle, if you don't actually use it, it's a lot harder. For example, if you are um, a musician and you don't practice your scales all the time, you get rusty, right? If you're an artist and you're not experimenting with new things or getting exposed to, you get rusty, right? And in the case of learning how to build a computer or fix the car, etc., who cares? We don't need to know that anymore. And so there's a little bit of that. Yet on the other hand, I'm terribly concerned about what AI can do in terms of critical thinking skills. There is enough problems today with people not having critical thinking skills. When people decide to outsource what thinking there is left to another system, AI, it means that you don't get the practice of asking the question. You don't get the practice of wiring stuff together. Sometimes you lose your creativity. You can't come up with good ideas because let's see what AI has to say, right? Rather than sort of going through. Um, if we did um, a survey here, I'm sorry we did not set it up. We did a survey. How many people do long form penmanship? And not so many as opposed to, oh, we got some people who've done it. Okay. So let me ask, if you've got children, how many of them are being taught today long form penmanship in the school? They learn printing and typing. In the old days, they learned printing and writing, right? So it's a very, very, very interesting question because do we all need to know penmanship in order to get our ideas across? And yet it's a beautiful thing to see calligraphy. It's a skill. Okay, I guess much like repairing a car or building a computer up and everything. But is something lost, right? I think with AI, particularly in the area of creativity and critical thinking, we have a bit of a risk here. And so, getting back to sort of the business focus, if we're going to embed some of this, what are we doing to make sure that what critical thinking training are we doing with our team? How are we building innovation into our organization and creativity, right? How do we sort of teach people that it's that synthesis between what you as that leader or as that manager within the organization is doing and what these tools can help with? In a certain sense, yes, tools make it possible, but people make it happen. And it becomes a little bit challenging when some of these key skills become, I don't know, rusty, let's say. Great question.
I have another question. Um, I've consumed countless hours on AI for workflow, for performance, for time saving. It's on and on and on. And of the hundreds of use cases I have scrolled through, I am surprised that at least in the content I am bumping into, and correct me if I'm wrong if you know other sources, I have seen nothing in a use case for self-improvement and personal growth. And as leaders, that's a big piece of the puzzle. I mean, now we're still managing people that have feelings and are complex and are not rational beings. Soon we'll be managing only robots, and maybe that's not going to be relevant. But for now, I was very surprised. I didn't see any prompts. How could I have handled this better? What better words could I have used in a situation that was tense and not just in an email that is worth really very little, something transactional, but like how could I have expressed myself with more empathy? I mean, these are just a couple of examples,
Yeah.
but I'm surprised that that wasn't part of the mix. Any thoughts?
I suspect that if we both look much harder, we would find something somewhere. The world is just so big. I'm sure there's something somewhere. I'll also say that sometimes when it comes to the self-improvement world, um, it's that human interaction. Let me give you a very specific example. Um, I'm a smart guy. Okay, yet for many years I had a coach. And how come being a smart guy who also knows how to use Google, why do I need a coach? Right? Because They knew the specific right questions and interactions that brought the best out of me. Okay, they helped solve the you don't know what you don't know problem. And in a certain sense, a lot of the coaching that I do sort of does the same thing. And so you say, well, how do we use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever from a self-improvement perspective? Maybe one of the things, if you say, well, gee, I don't want to coach, or you can say, let me put so many prompts in there. Okay, let me create in there what that perfect coach is. Let me build up all of their experiences, and then let me have a conversation with that coach, okay, where you put scenarios. You know, one of the things I think that's so problematic about that is that what comes out might be maybe the worst thing that you could do, not the best, because the person with experience has probably got more data in their head than what you could probably create, if you will, as your proxy coach online. Maybe at some point it'll be differently, but I think you know, it reminds me of a computer program years ago. I remember it, oh my God, back in school, it was called Eliza. And and you would type in, very much like ChatGPT today, you would type in, um, Eliza, I'm feeling sad today. And bup, 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 and then the computer, Eliza, would say, why are you feeling sad today? And then you would say, oh, because my kid did such and such. And it would say, um, oh, so your kid did such and such. Tell me more. Then you'd say, well, blah, 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 blah. And they would say, so can you tell me more about blah, 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 blah? And then you say something else and it would say, I could see why you're sad because of blah, 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 blah. And it was like a nonsense conversation. Look up Eliza on Google. You could probably find some present day versions of it. Um, we've gone up very far from that. Okay. But from a coaching perspective, I just couldn't imagine. Okay. Just because every client is different and the experience of every coach is different, right? So good question.
Help us wrap our arms around AI's capabilities. Many people, the leaders of the world who are more senior now in their positions with their experience, think AI, they think LLM, the large language model, like ChatGPTs. They're using it like Google. They think it's a search engine. What's going to take to change the shift that the sky is the limit and they can create whatever they want?
That's a good question. And it also begs the question about large language models because many people think that AI equals large language models. But really, large language models are just one example of a different type of AI. Right now, it's the big elephant, and a lot of research and a lot of researchers are sort of pulling on that because guess what? There's a lot of money following it. But there's all kinds of other um, types of AI that are out there, some of which are getting short shrift, and eventually will frankly um, add as much or at least different value than just large language models. So.
Okay, so building on that question, we're seeing now that the gap between your technical employees and your non-technical employees is really shrinking because now your non-technical employees can, go to a tool and make it to have it do all kinds, teach it how to do things or do it for you. Like, how do you think that will impact dynamics in the workplace?
It's going to be it's dramatic. Okay, and let me give you one sectoral example. Back in the day, people thought that if you got a job as a software engineer, a computer science person, you were going to be set for life. Set for life. Okay, you're going to be making huge, huge amounts of money. You're going to have the prestige of creating the newest technology. You'll be having some challenging coding, projects, etc. Nowadays, the majority of coding is actually done by using AI tools, where the developer, the software engineer, is guiding it, vibe coding, guiding it to what they actually want. But the huge amount of thousands of lines of codes are basically being developed, immediately. So therefore, it's almost a commoditization of that entire sort of field of study, which is ironic. AI writing AI, right? There is a human part of it, but it's very different than okay, the way it was just a few years ago. This is not going to change. And so that's one example of where the gap between those who are highly proficient, highly technical, highly valued, paid a lot of money, and everybody else is very different. I'm not a coder, but I can actually go to any of these models that have got a coding capability and say, put up this web page for me, right? Or gee, some developer did this thing on my website. Can you just fix it? This is what I wanted to do. And it'll pump out the code. And I don't know about coding, but I certainly know about describing the problem, right? So there's an awful lot of change happening, and whenever there's change, there's friction. Um, um, Gee, are we going to start firing our coders, for example, or are we going to redeploy them doing different things? Gee, what does that mean in terms of who we recruit? Gee, back at the universities, colleges, what courses are we offering, etc. So, 5 years ago, there was no such job in the mainstream as data scientist, which is different than a software engineer. It's a very different job, right? But now it's a very, very big thing because data is a very, very big thing. So what's the dynamic in the workplace? How about, for example, when somebody's given the task to do something they've never ever done before? In the old day, you'd say, well, let me get out some books. I'm going to learn about this. Let me take a course so that I'm qualified. The company would say, let's do some training to wire people up to that particular level so they can learn that specific technical thing, whatever that is. Okay, now it's, okay, I want you to do such and such. And it might be expected that you actually, with no experience, I'll take coding as an example, no experience in coding, that all of a sudden you've got to go and not do it yourself, but get AI to basically do 95% of it or 100% of it for you. And so all of a sudden, there's different expectations of people within an organization. Now, large organizations and institutions work very, very slowly. Startups, scale-ups, they work very, very, very quickly, right? So it'll be different depending on the organization, different in government versus private sector, different in certain industries, healthcare versus law. Versus a retailer, right? But the impact and the frictions that exist, I mean that's what happens during a change or any kind of transformation. And I think from a corporate perspective, if you know there's going to be that kind of change and friction, not friction in a negative sense, but just a huge change management um, task ahead, then maybe you can get ahead of it, right? And not sort of be in catch-up mode all the time.
I have endless more questions. I could keep Randall and our friends here all day. Any questions you have or any thoughts, any perspective shifts that happened in the hour that you want to share with the group?
Steve?
I just wanted to say thank you very much. I have to take off to a meeting, but great ideas and some good food for thought there. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you, Steve.
Wonderful.
I'm actually late for my next meeting, but I
Well,
wanted to
thank
say
you for
thank
staying
you.
with us.
There's a lot there to noodle on, so I appreciate that.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much. Thank you.
It was great. Thanks. It was a lot to contemplate.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you to everyone who joined today to talk about AI. It's going to keep growing and growing, and our perspectives will keep changing, and our skills will keep growing. So if anyone has any questions about this topic, who wants to coach with Randall, bring us to a retreat, bring us to your team, do reach out. Happy to share resources and have a conversation. And we'll see you back next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.